to the Busy Fit Podcast, episode 23. If you missed episode 22, we went over body composition and how to test it and also how to measure and see trends. Today, we'll be having a conversation with our director of online programming, Duvall. We're just going to do a back and forth Q&A about really just underrated or overrated on certain subjects and have a discussion on these subjects. So we'll dive into it.
Yeah, I'm excited for this because I think we're going off the cuff here. We don't know what each other's going to ask. So this is the farthest thing from scripted we can get. So we'll see where our heads are at.
Yeah, and it's been, how long's it been since you were on a podcast? It has to have been at least a month.
Yeah, it's been a minute. So I was due.
I'll kick us off. Cold showers for recovery.
Oh man, that's a tough one. It sucks because like the whole premise of this is like we have to answer like polarized, like on one end of the spectrum or the other, where something like this already is like I don't know if it should be underrated or overrated. It's just like rated. But I guess okay, so I'll say underrated for cold showers because I'll put it in the category of like thermal regulation for recovery. So like any sort of like hot cold type contrast, and again just like thermal manipulation for the body, I think does pose a lot of health benefits. Is it something that like is like gonna cure everything and make you feel like a different person when you're working out? No, probably not. But in the grand scheme of things, yeah, I'll say underrated because I think for a lot of people that do train hard, maybe it's something that's just underutilized. So I'm sticking to that. I'm gonna go underrated for cold showers.
That's interesting because I think there's two polarizing sides here from the strength training perspective where it's like people think that, cold plunge or cold showers are going to inhibit strength gains if you do it right after your exercise, and should it be separated? Or is it just something that's like beneficial to do every single day?
Yeah, I think just like anything, it depends. But I think if it is something like, again, go back to thermal regulation in general, like if you do something like that, or if you take cold showers like every day, your body adapts to stress and it adapts to recovery. So I think, eh, overkill every day probably, but like in certain, times of training, like you got like big race coming up or something like that, you know, to overdo it for a short period of time may not be a bad idea. But I like that one. Since you gave me a tough one to kind of kick us off, I'm going to give you a tough one. So we came out with an article or a guide about this recently, and in that guide, it kind of played both ends of the spectrum, how it's overrated and underrated. So uh, my subject for you is zone two cardio.
Oh, this is a really tough one. Zone two is an interesting thing because I think people think it's either like it's good or it's bad. It's good for this thing and it's bad for this thing. And people think like it's the answer to like weight loss or answer to like, getting a really big goal, like training for a marathon or whatever it is. And this is a thing I think we talk about all the time, right? Where it's like there's all these variables that you can manipulate in exercise. And the intensity is just another one of those variables. And so for a certain population, like, yeah, zone two can be great. And does it have a lot of benefit? Absolutely. But is that perfect for everyone? Maybe not. Like for a high stressed individual, it's like, yeah, maybe we need to stay away from high intensity exercise. But if we're thinking about like someone who can handle, being able to have some intensity in their day, like they don't need to train just zone two. I feel like we do have a lot of people though that like from the weight loss side have had really good benefits having like 3 or 4 strength training days, 1 or 2 zone two days, but that's like a very specific population. Now I know when I was coaching swimming, for example, we did a ton of zone two with everyone, but that's because they have to be able to handle a really high intensity level of training regardless of where they're at during the year. We're training for meets during the summer, spring, fall, like it doesn't matter. They have to be ready to handle anything. So like you can't train hard all the time. I mean, that same rule applies to general population too, right? Where it's like you can train hard sometimes, But if you train hard constantly of other stressors, you're not going to maintain that for long term. So I guess if I had to say overall, I would say it's underrated just because you see some people doing like group fitness classes where they're training at a really high intensity every single day. And then they look back 2 or 3 months, they're like, why didn't I lose weight? Why didn't I get stronger? Like all these things. Like it's, if you're training intense every single day, you're never really allowing yourself to have a chance to recover and build from what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Part of me wants to say that it's overrated just because of like the sheer amount of like blind hype that it gets from some people online. But at the same time, like underrated it is my, I guess, end of the day answer just because like yeah, it does pose a lot of benefits. It's like, for anyone kind of regardless of what your training goals are, like having that aerobic foundation and that, solid training base of like your respective training pyramid is really important. So it's underrated, but yeah, some people that just live and die by it and will fall on the sword for zone two makes me want to say overrated, but they're on to something though. So I'll give
Well,
it to them.
and that's a great sign too, right? Like if you're looking at a training program or a coach specifically, and they're like, "Oh, I really believe in this specific type." It's like if we were to take all of the variables that we have for training, and like realistically, none of them are overrated or underrated. They're all just level playing, and you're manipulating the ones that you have to manipulate to get the best result possible. And that's going to look very different for one person versus another. You know.
For sure, for sure. All right, well, back to you.
So I think this is an interesting one because it's something that you've seen on the athletic world for a really long time. I think probably 4 or 5 years ago, you saw it get a lot bigger on, just the general population because the machines became available. But electric muscle stimulation, like that's something that was purely athletic. Now you see with like complex units and all of that. Like, what's your take there? Underrated or
Mm, So that's another good one. I I want to split it up into two categories. I want to say it is it's underrated for for the right user, and the right user being someone like returning from some sort of injury or maybe like post surgery or something. Um, I think like certain modalities of STEM are great. So like if someone like um, has a labral or UCL tear or something, or they tear their ACL, like they're locked in these positions in a brace or a cast or something for periods of time. They lose that neural connection or part of that neural connection from their brain to that area of the body, and I think it's very underrated from facilitating that like neuromuscular type connection, for lack of better words, back uh, in like an early stage rehab standpoint. But from just an overall, like, uh, you know, just an athlete or someone training that just wants to feel better, do something, I'm going to say that it's overrated. I think it's good and it feels good. It's one of those like maybe a little bit more of a band-aid than anything. Again, I think that there's a lot of merit in the early stages of rehab or return to play scenario, but uh, yeah, overrated for the general population.
I just thought of a really good one for you after you asked me.
Go ahead. I'm on a reindeer.
All right. Chiropractors.
You put me on the spot here. I yeah, I'll just they're overrated. For again, when we're talking like I have to be polarized one way or another. I'm not saying that there's not a time and place at some point for a lot of people, um, but the chiropractor chiropractors as like their practice, like from what I've seen, and I'm uneducated on it. I've only been to a couple. Like again, kind of going back to the idea of like putting more band-aids on things and fixing the root problem. Like if I had the choice of or the ability to go to a physical therapist versus a chiropractor, I pick a physical therapist 99 out of 100 times. Um, but that may ruffle a lot of feathers for some people that may live and die on the hill of going to their chiropractor if they are a chiropractor. Again, I'm not saying that there's not a use and that they can't be helpful, but as a general practice, I would say that for how much people do tend to like down that hill of like, oh, I have to go see my chiropractor or do this and like see them once a week, I'd say it's definitely overrated. That was a good one. You put me on the spot there.
I had to.
One for you. We'll go a piece of equipment, lifting shoes, particularly like elevated heel, like that kind of hybrid shoe, like a squat shoe or Olympic lifting shoe.
That's a good one as well because I think anytime you get into like specific pieces of equipment, then there's a population that they're going to be great for and a population they're maybe not as great for. And so I think if you're, I'm gonna go ahead and just go ahead and say I think weightlifting shoes are overrated only from the perspective of I think there's like merit to actually having the mobility to go through that range with like a flat foot, uh, and making sure you have that mobility first. Now, if you're actually thinking about you're training as an athlete and you want to get under load more and like be in the proper position without having to put place below your heels, like sure, that's all great. Like I get that side of it. But if you're thinking about like the, you know, 30, 40-year old weekend warrior who's going to lift 1 day a week for a squat. And they're going to do just like a couple of total body days. And they may get 20, 30, 40 minutes of working out in. It's like, let's just make sure we're mobile in every plane first. And then like go into adding in specifics for training and kind of those more specific items just because what's the point? Right? Like that's not actually going to simulate something you're actually going to see for an activity of daily living where you're going to use that all the time. It's like, let's make sure we have that ankle mobility. Let's make sure we have that like thoracic spine mobility to be able to go through the proper motion without any assistance. And then if we want to train to get more under load or something like that, or you're a high level athlete, then like, sure, let's add a lifting shoe.
That's that's a fair point. I'll agree with you. Even as someone who don't know the last time I did a workout or a lift without lifting shoes. Uh, yeah, I think you make some great points. Generally, maybe something that's overrated. Um, one of my favorite quotes is, you don't want to have $200 shoes with a 10-cent squat. Um, and yeah, I think kind of to your point, like focus on that kind of stuff first, like the actual movement itself and the training before you know getting too focused on like the accessories that can aid in that. I'm gonna ask another one just because you asked me to, kind of on the same line of like accessories or supplementing your workout. Next one I got for you is pre-workout, and I'll say maybe I'll just stick to just caffeine. I won't bubble all of pre-workouts together, but caffeine as a pre-workout.
Caffeine as a pre workout is probably overrated. Uh, and I actually just went through this myself. And so it was an interesting kind of experiment because I caffeinated pre workout for 15 years
Well,
consistently. It was right. It was like I went, started off as like pre workout and then it went into like, nitric oxide, like going in like full into the pre workout stuff. Then I went back to caffeine or just coffee. And 8 weeks ago, we stopped caffeine altogether. I thought my workouts gonna like tank, and they did for a week. But then I started making sure I was actually just like getting the proper nutrients and fuel timing before my workout. So, making sure if I'm eating an hour and a half before the workout, I'm getting like all three protein, fat, carbs in. As I get closer, I drop off some of the fats first, and then I drop off and have like more simple carbohydrates as I get closer to it. And then, making sure I'm properly hydrated. And I think you get probably more of a benefit from that because like we all do tend to forget that energy's like coffee and caffeine is fake energy, right? It's just blocking you from feeling tired versus actually like creating energy. And energy comes from food sources. And so it's like fuel properly, you'll feel better. Not like in an acute sense where it's like, hey, I need an extra little bump to get through this workout today because of these circumstances that made things really hard. Like, sure, it's a really good fit, but there's so many other things we can do, like proper fuel timing, hydration, even stuff like Beat Elite. which is a vasodilator. Like that stuff's amazing and not going to have the same effect on your body that caffeine will. So I think if in general, if we go more towards that side of things, just for like the everyday person, it's great. But also from a performance perspective, we're talking about like, hey, I know of a really heavy squat day coming up this week, and I want to make sure I make it through for like, that fourth or fifth set. Then it's like, sure, we can push out fatigue a little bit with caffeine. And so I think from an acute perspective, it can be great.
Yeah, I respect and appreciate that answer. I I don't really know which side of the coin I'm on with it, because there's like there is noted in research like performance benefits to use, but to your point, like using it as essentially almost a crutch, and I'm right there with you. For however long I've been working, there's probably only been a handful of sessions where I haven't had some sort of stimulant prior to, which I know isn't great. But like, can it help? Yeah. Is it something that you need? Uh, no. There's other ways to go about it. One of my favorite quotes from a mentor of mine was, pre-workout is just it's borrowing energy from the future, and the way to pay it back is through adrenal fatigue. So that's what we get. Depending on the amount and whatever stuff may be in a certain pre-workout, like that the crash that we feel afterwards and everything else. Like we're just borrowing that energy from the end of our day and putting it into something, again, a little bit more acute or right in front of us, like a training session. But is it useful? Sure. But yeah, I'm with you. I'll agree that it's probably an overrated substance.
And not to say that you have to like cut it all together. And again, like you said, from the performance perspective, like we're talking about like lactate threshold or feeling a little bit better in those like last few reps of a set. Like there is definitely a benefit there. But is it something that you should take like every day before you're dependent on it? Probably not. So, all right. Interesting one for you because I think you have a good take on this and kind of rolling into the, you know, ingesting things for workouts perspective, CBD products for recovery.
Uh, to be honest, I just don't know. Um, I I'm going to say overrated just based on the fact that I personally haven't seen or read a ton of research on its actual efficacy yet. I know, just like a lot of things and any sort of like trend or whatever, like a lot of people want to swear by and say that it really helps them. You know, I haven't read literature yet that, uh, you know, really advocates for its use. Not to say that it's not useful, but Brian, it could just be one of those crazy right now. People are like, "Oh, I'm doing this, and it helps me feel better, helps with recovery, like whatever else." And I think that if anything, like the biggest recovery modality that the human body can get, one of three things is sleep, hydration, and food. And sleep probably being the king of all those. And I think even if it's a more subjective value to like something like CBD helping you sleep, then there may be merit there. But it kind of goes back to like the caffeine and other things, though. It's like if that's what you feel like you need to like get a better sleep or more restful sleep, there's probably another issue or something that probably need to figure out first, rather than just running to the just like supplement or new trend to try to assist you with that. But yeah, at the end of the day, I'd say overrated, but with an asterisk, just because again, I don't personally know too much or haven't read the literature one way or the other really saying that it is good or bad, other than people on the internet. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's the same with anything that comes out and like you see now. It's like it's way too early to tell. One, if it's actually going to be beneficial, and then two, is it even going to be something that's going to be good for your long-term health when there's no actual studies, like there's nothing actually like able to cover that amount of time and say, hey, this was a good thing. We forget that there was a point when people didn't think smoking was bad for you. you know. And I'm sure there's going to be plenty of these things that are coming out daily now, where they're going to look back 10, 15 years from now and be like, wow, that was so stupid that we had everyone take this because of these long-term health effects that there were. So,
Yeah. Who knows? I mean, maybe there won't be anything. I have no idea. I'll let the scientists in the lab figure out, and people, other people do that and figure it out for me before I give my yay or nay for it. But I'll give you one more here. It's kind of similar to the last one with caffeine. Um, Creatine.
I want to say overrated, but I'm going to say underrated just from the perspective of I think it's overrated from the perspective of people think that like this is going to be a life-changing supplement for them and it's going to like suddenly you're going to do these amazing things and see these amazing benefits and that can be true, but like, you have to take care of the base stuff first, like you said, like sleep, hydration, food, making sure that you're getting the proper exercise and proper stress management and lifestyle habits and all that stuff first, then any supplement's going to be very beneficial. And that's where I'm going to say overall underrated, just because there's so much research backing up the fact that there aren't necessarily like long-term health issues attached to it. You definitely are going to get some strength gains from it. It's going to allow you to recover better. You know, there's a lot of really great benefits from it. It's just gets from a population that is looking for that like magic pill cure, the one thing that's going to like make everything better for them. It's never one thing. Like it's usually a combination of things. And so it's overrated for the population that's looking for that one thing, but it's underrated for the population that's doing a ton of things right and is looking to kind of enhance to that next level.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I would also agree, like it's underrated overall, picking that, polar end of the under and overrated, but you know, just because there are like, yeah, talking about like being researched back, like there's a lot. It is probably, with caffeine, maybe arguably the most researched, you know, supplement that is out there, and it is safe, it is effective. It's not like a steroid or something. It's not going to just like, make you into this superhuman, but has a lot of good effects. Definitely works and is safe. So yeah, I'm gonna say underrated as well.
Thanks for joining me today, Aaron. Stay tuned for part 2 of the Underrated Overrated series.
Looking forward to it.
I think we truly appreciate your support in helping us grow our podcast. So if you can leave a review on your favorite podcast platform, it only takes 5 seconds. It makes a world of a difference for us. Your feedback not only encourages us to keep producing great content, but also helps others discover our show. And if you've got a friend, family member, or colleague who you feel likely would benefit from listening to our podcast, please consider sharing it with them. Word of mouth is incredibly powerful, and your recommendation means the world for us. Let's get into it.